Some women spend their entire lives chasing the glow of success, only to discover that when the lights fade, their homes feel emptier than any courtroom or stage they ever walked across. At 60, Linda has wealth, prestige, and recognition, yet not a single chair is filled at her Christmas dinner table. Behind the polished image of achievement lies a heart heavy with regret, a mother who missed her children's childhood, a wife who let her marriage slip away, now holding on to the faint hope that it isn't too late to make things right. Could there still be a way back? Inside the brightly lit mansion, Linda stood before a long walnut dining table, its polished surface gleaming like a mirror. She carefully spread a spotless white cloth and pulled out the chair at the head of the table. In contrast, the other 7 chairs remained perfectly aligned along the sides, silent as if they were invisible guests. Hands once used to signing contracts now adjusted each silver fork carefully, placed knives and spoons at exact distances, and lifted crystal glasses to catch the light before setting them down with almost obsessive precision. At the center, she placed a freshly roasted turkey, its aroma mingling with the scent of pine candles drifting through the room. Everything looked elegant, refined, flawless, ready for a feast full of guests. Yet only one chair had been drawn out, the one for her. Linda returned to admire her work, but her eyes did not shine. The scene revealed itself for what it was. A banquet for one, where every detail spoke of a woman who once believed order and perfection could preserve the image of a happy family. But in that vast room beyond the ticking of the wall clock, there was nothing else, only a silence that spread coldly through her chest. Linda left the dining room and walked down the hallway into the living room. The crystal chandelier cast a soft golden glow over a wall crowded with framed photographs. Each was encased in dark wood, arranged as meticulously as a private gallery. There was Linda in a navy suit shaking hands with the state governor. Linda was on stage accepting a Medal of Honor and smiling as she cut the ribbon at a company opening. Other pictures showed her answering reporters, speaking at conferences, raising a glittering glass trophy high above her head. Her eyes in every image shone with pride. But as Linda slowed and looked closer, she faced what she had always known yet avoided. Not a single picture held her family. No David was at her side, no Mark or Emily was at a Christmas gathering, and no moment of togetherness was preserved. That wall of triumph became a giant mirror, reflecting a strong woman while exposing the emptiness stretched wide inside her heart. Linda returned to the living room and lowered herself onto the soft leather sofa. On the coffee table sat a small gift box wrapped in shiny silver paper, a neat label written, "To Emily." Her hand lingered on the tag, her gaze heavy. Suddenly, a pair of worn pink ballet shoes tumbled down from the shelf by the bookcase, their faded fabric frayed with time. Linda bent to pick them up, her fingers trembling as they touched the scuffed tips. Absent-mindedly, she turned the knob of an old, dust-covered radio in the corner. A slow jazz tune filled the room, the saxophone's warm notes tinged with sorrow. Music swelled through the vast space, but Linda sat still, her eyes distant, fixed on the emptiness before her, where once there should have been the sound of family laughter. In Boston in the 1990s, the county courthouse was packed. Linda, just past 30, her brown hair neatly tied back and sharp eyes shining behind thin-rimmed glasses, stood at the podium. Her voice was clear and commanding, every word landing with such precision that the jury leaned forward to catch each phrase. The opposing attorney was more seasoned, but Linda turned the tide with every piece of evidence, every cutting question. When the judge's gavel fell and victory was declared for her side, Linda smiled with pride, shook hands with her colleagues, and stepped into a storm of camera flashes. Surrounded by applause, she felt ambition rush through her veins, certain she had finally joined the ranks of those who led the way. Outside the courthouse, her old cell phone buzzed with a message. David told her he'd pick up Mark and Emily from school, asking if she'd be home for dinner. Linda glanced at it briefly and slipped the phone back into her bag. She was too busy answering reporters' questions about the thrill of winning and the role of women in law. The image of David and their children faded, replaced by flashing lights and handshakes of respect. One summer afternoon, 8-year-old Emily fell from her bike on the sidewalk, her wrist twisting awkwardly. David rushed her into the emergency room, while young Mark trembled in the hallway. In the sterile white room, Emily wore a plastic bracelet stamped Emily Carter, and cried out for her mother. Her small eyes stayed fixed on the door, waiting for it to open and reveal Linda. But Linda was still at the office, buried in a high-stakes case with a major client. Her secretary reminded her more than once, "Your daughter is in the hospital." Still, Linda only replied, "As soon as this hearing ends, I'll stop by." While the doctor adjusted Emily's wrist, the little girl bit her lip, eyes brimming with tears, whispering, "Mom will come, Mom will come." Yet the door never opened. David comforted her, swallowing his frustration, knowing Linda would not make it in time. Near midnight, when Emily finally drifted to sleep, David sat by her bed, the hospital bracelet glowing faintly under the dim light. He felt the distance in his marriage stretch even further. Emily would later keep that bracelet, a painful reminder that her mother chose to be elsewhere when she needed her most. David reserved a table at a small Italian restaurant on their 10th wedding anniversary. In this place they had once dated as students. He arrived early, waiting with a bottle of red wine already uncorked and a rose by his side. The restaurant buzzed with laughter and chatter, but the chair across from him stayed empty. 7 o'clock passed, then 8, then nearly 9. David kept glancing at the door. Linda, meanwhile, was at a networking event for her law firm, shaking hands with influential partners, promising future deals. Her phone vibrated repeatedly, but she only frowned, whispering, "He'll understand. Just tonight." At last, David left the restaurant, the untouched rose in hand. When he got home, the children were asleep, and Linda was still not back. He placed the rose on the kitchen table and sat alone listening to the radio, a jazz tune echoing through the quiet house. From that night on, a crack marked their marriage, a crack too deep to be mended by a simple apology. Mark was 35 now, living in New York in a small apartment so tidy it felt cold. His work as a technology engineer consumed him with numbers and machines. Yet, it never erased the emptiness left from childhood. Linda still tried to keep in touch, sending messages on birthdays and Christmas. The last time she wrote a long note. "Mark, I miss you so much. I hope you're healthy and that work is going well. This Christmas I want you to come home. I'll cook the dish you loved when you were little." His phone buzzed long before lighting up with just one word. "Okay." Nothing more. Linda stared at the screen, her chest tightening. She knew it wasn't agreement, only his way of shutting the conversation down. In that silence, the distance between them wasn't just a few hundred miles. Decades of absence couldn't be erased. Emily was different. She lived in Cambridge, less than an hour's drive from Linda's mansion, but the distance in her heart stretched wider than an ocean. After their parents' divorce, Emily was raised by David, who was steady and tender. Whenever Linda called, Emily answered curtly, if at all. On Facebook, Linda often left comments under pictures of her granddaughter Sophie. "So beautiful, sweetheart. Grandma loves you so much." Then one day, when Linda opened Emily's page, she discovered she had been blocked. No photos, no updates, nothing but a cold blank space. Her hands trembled as she sat frozen, realizing she had been pushed out, not just from her daughter's world, but from her milestones and even her granddaughter's childhood. Emily wasn't just angry. She had chosen to erase her mother. One winter afternoon, Linda went to the basement to search for Christmas decorations. The space was dusty, stacked with old cardboard boxes. Opening one, she found school notebooks, crayons, and small toys. Buried among the yellowed papers was an aged envelope, the childish handwriting spelling out, "To Mom." With trembling hands, she unfolded it and read the uneven lines. "Mom, please come to my science award ceremony on Friday. I'll be on stage in front of the whole school. If you are there, I'll be so happy. I promise I'll study hard so you'll be proud." Tears streamed down Linda's face. She remembered that day. She had flown to New York for a big client meeting, never knowing her son had written this letter. It had sat unsent, forgotten in a drawer, now slicing into her heart like a blade. Linda sank to the cold floor, clutching the crumpled paper to her chest, sobbing uncontrollably. Her cries echoed through the empty basement, mixing with the wind rattling at the window, a reminder that the price of ambition wasn't only empty chairs at the dinner table, and the unheard pleas of a son who once longed for his mother's presence. The next morning, Linda sat alone in her study, once the heart of her power. The dark wood desk was covered with files, thick case folders, and framed photos of her professional triumphs neatly lined up in order. On the computer screen, the contract for selling her shares was open, the words cold and blunt. Transfer of ownership. Her hand hovered over the mouse, her finger trembling as if resisting the click. This was the company she had built over 3 decades, the very measure of success the press had praised her for. Yet now it felt like chains that had kept her from her family. Linda drew a deep breath, closed her eyes and thought of Mark's letter, Emily's hospital bracelet. Then she pressed the mouse. A small ding sounded simple, dry, but it was the echo of an entire era ending for Linda. She slipped off the gold watch she had once bought after a landmark case and placed it in a drawer, realizing for the first time that no luxury could ever buy back a family meal. The morning light poured through the window, illuminating her face, not the sharp, victorious attorney, but a weary mother finally ready to start over. The following day, Linda tiptoed into the large kitchen, a space long used only by hired staff. On the counter lay an old notebook, its childish scribbles still clear. "Mom, I like spaghetti from Mark, and Grandma's apple pie is the best from Emily." Linda began chopping onions, her awkward hands making her eyes sting with tears, from the onions and from the memories. The pot boiled over, and she fumbled to lower the heat. Her hands that once signed million-dollar deals were now clumsy with knives and spoons. But she persisted, tasting repeatedly, adjusting salt and sugar until the dishes finally took shape. A plate of steaming spaghetti and a rustic, cracked apple pie sat on the table, their simple aroma filling the house. Linda stood still, realizing this was the scent of happiness her children had once longed for. That evening, she carefully packed 2 meals, adding the few rare family photos she still had, and sent them to Mark and Emily. A week passed. Mark's package remained untouched, left at his door with a delivery slip still stuck. Emily's box returned unopened, the apple pie untouched, with a hastily scribbled note. "You don't need to do this." Linda held it in her hands, her fingers icy, feeling as though even her smallest efforts were being rejected. She sank into a chair, staring out the window at the blinking city lights. For the first time in years she felt stripped bare. Nothing left but the fragile beat of a mother's heart trying to find her way back to her family. At dawn, Linda boarded a flight to New York, her small suitcase rolling across the tiled hallway of an apartment building. The air was sharp with winter, her breath rising in pale clouds as she stood before door 14B, Mark's apartment. The deep blue door loomed cold and distant, much like her son himself. She raised her hand and knocked softly, echoing in the silent corridor. After a pause, the door creaked open. Mark appeared in a dark sweater, his face lined with weariness beyond his years. His eyes held no surprise, no joy, just a thin layer of ice. "What are you doing here, Mom?" His voice was low-clipped. Linda forced a faint smile, searching for warmth in the reunion. "I wanted to see you. To talk." Mark sighed, opening the door wider, though his hand remained on the knob as if ready to close it at any moment. 5 minutes. Only 5. The apartment inside was immaculate to sterility, with bare walls and only a few tech posters. Linda stepped in, feeling like a stranger wandering into a life that should have been hers to know. Mark stood with his arms crossed, leaning against the wall, his eyes fixed on the envelope Linda placed on the table. She opened it slowly, pulling out the faded letter she had found in the basement, her voice trembling. "I found this, you wrote it when you were 12. Mark snatched it from her, his eyes flickering momentarily before tightening. He read aloud the shaky handwriting. "Mom, please come to my science award ceremony. I'll be so happy if you're there." His voice cracked, then hardened. "You didn't come. I looked around the auditorium, and I saw an empty chair. I waited for you. Do you even know how that felt?" Linda's hands shook, tears welling up. I was wrong, Mark. I never knew this letter existed, but that doesn't change the truth. I wasn't there. I failed you." Mark let out a bitter laugh, anger flashing in his eyes. "Not just that day. During my sophomore year, I broke down so badly that I dropped out for a semester. I emailed you. 'Mom, I'm not okay. Do you remember what you sent back?' A meeting schedule." His words cut like knives. Linda covered her face, sobbing. "I thought you were strong. I thought you didn't need me. I was a fool." Mark's voice dropped lower, heavy with hurt. "I needed you, but you didn't see it. I didn't need a mother in the headlines. I needed a mother in the audience." Linda stepped closer, her voice desperate. I know I don't deserve it, but please give me one chance. Just one chance to be your mother, even if it's late. Mark turned his head away, clutching the letter, his hand trembling as his eyes reflected the conflict between anger and the longing for family that had never truly died. The silence stretched on, broken only by the muffled sound of cars outside. At last, Mark drew in a long breath, his tone cold again. You should go. I can't forgive you. Not now. Linda nodded, her lips quivering, but she didn't argue. She walked toward the door, each step heavy as lead. With her hand on the knob, she turned back to look at him one last time, her eyes pleading but steady. I won't give up on you, Mark. No matter how much you hate me, I'll still be here. Mark said nothing, his silence thick with unspoken words. Linda opened the door, the winter wind rushing into the hallway, pulling her suitcase behind her with slow, weary steps. The door closed behind her with a hollow thud. But when she glanced back, she noticed something small yet piercing. The lock hadn't turned. Mark hadn't locked the door. She froze momentarily, her heart tightening around that fragile spark of hope, before stepping into the freezing New York night. Inside the apartment, Mark stood still, the crumpled letter clenched in his hand, his eyes clouded with turmoil, as if even he wasn't sure he truly wanted to close that door forever. That morning, Linda was fumbling in her expansive kitchen. Flour dusted the counter, eggshells scattered, and a pot of chicken soup bubbled away, the sharp scent of onion hanging in the air. She wiped her hands nervously on a brand-new apron, trying to recall the recipe scribbled in her notebook, when the sudden ring of the phone shattered the stillness. She picked up, and a nurse's voice came through, urgent yet polite. Excuse me, is this Mrs. Linda Hayes? We're calling from the emergency contact list. Just a reminder for Mr. David Miller's chemotherapy appointment next week. Linda froze, the spoon slipping from her hand, clattering loudly against the floor. Chemotherapy? What did you say? A pause lingered before the nurse added. Oh, perhaps he hasn't updated his records. Sorry for the disturbance. But Linda barely heard the rest. Her chest tightened, her heartbeat pounding. Cancer. David was fighting alone. Less than an hour later, Linda pulled up to David's small house. The contrast to her spacious, cold mansion was stark. His home was a modest ranch-style house, the beige paint peeling with age. Once green potted plants on the porch were now dry and brittle, with leaves scattered across the steps. The curtains hung unevenly, unable to hide the dust coating the windows. The door creaked open when she knocked, revealing a narrow hallway dimly lit by a weak yellow bulb. The air carried the faint mix of disinfectant and dampness. Inside, the living room was bare, an old recliner with worn fabric, a few medical journals left open on the coffee table, a pair of slippers lying askew on the cracked wooden floor. A dusty radio sat untouched on the shelf, as if it hadn't been played in years. And at the doorway David appeared, his frame gaunt, hair sparse and gray, face hollowed, though his eyes remained steady. He paused, then spoke in a rough, low voice. You shouldn't be here. Linda swallowed hard, gripping the phone still in her hand. I know, David. They called me from the hospital. From that day on, Linda began visiting David more often. She never admitted she wanted to take care of him, only smiled and offered simple excuses. I cooked too much, thought you might help me finish it. A container of steaming chicken soup was in her hands, the fragrant warmth filling his quiet kitchen. David frowned slightly but took it, his thin hands trembling as he held the spoon. Linda stood silently watching each sip. Not like my mother's, David said slowly. But it's warm. Linda let out a small laugh, the first time in years she felt his approval in any form. In the days that followed, she repeated the ritual. Sometimes it was a pot roast, sometimes a batch of cookies browned unevenly at the edges. Each time she set them down, she teased, "Tell me if this works, I've got a lot to learn." Deep inside, she knew it was just a way to stay longer and fill the gap left by years of ambition. In the afternoons, she brought the daily paper, sitting beside the sofa to read aloud. Her voice rose and fell with care, though she sometimes stopped, her throat tightening. David closed his eyes, listening quietly, his hand resting lightly on the armrest as if savoring a rhythm of life long forgotten. One evening, Linda dusted off the old radio and turned it on. A saxophone's mellow notes drifted through the room, wrapping the silence in jazz. David smiled faintly, his fingers tapping to the beat. Linda sat still, memories rushing back. Mark and Emily chasing each other around the living room, while she and David shared a glass of red wine, the same music playing in the background. Neither spoke, letting the past wash over them, filling the empty air. At that moment, Linda realized that this quiet, worn-down house, more than her polished mansion, was where the best of her memories lived, memories she had abandoned for far too long. One late evening, the yellow light in the living room cast shadows across David's gaunt face. He motioned for Linda to sit beside him, his hand trembling as he set a glass of water on the table. "Linda," he began, his voice slow but steady, "I never hated you." Linda looked up in shock, her eyes instantly brimming with tears. David held her gaze. "I only regret that you missed the family. You won dozens of cases and signed countless contracts, but weren't there when we needed you most. That's the only thing that ever hurt me." Linda choked back sobs, clutching his hand. "If I could go back, I would choose differently, I swear." He shook his head with a gentle smile. "No one gets to go back. But you still have the present. Use it." He reached into a drawer, pulled out a yellowed envelope, and placed it in her hands. "This is a letter I wrote for Mark and Emily. If I'm not here anymore, give it to them yourself. I want them to know. Forgiveness isn't for me, it's for them." Linda held the fragile yet unbearably heavy envelope, as though it carried 30 years of sorrow. His shaky handwriting pressed into the paper, each word sinking deep into her heart. Linda broke down, crying into David's hand, the sobs spilling into the room. No longer the strong attorney, no longer the successful woman, only an ex-wife, only a mother who had lost what mattered most, now clinging to what was left of her life. David laid his frail hand gently on her shoulder, the faint warmth enough to soothe her, and in that moment Linda understood. Her journey of redemption had only just begun. On a gray afternoon, Linda stopped in front of a small house in Cambridge, its white wooden fence and trimmed vines neatly kept. She stood for a moment on the porch, gripping a box of freshly baked cookies, then pressed the bell. The door creaked open and Emily appeared in an earth-toned cardigan, her hair tied high, her eyes sharp but cold. "What are you doing here?" The question fell dry and hard. Linda steadied her voice. "I just want to talk if you'll let me." Emily hesitated, then opened the door wide enough for Linda to enter the foyer. The air inside was warm with the scent of wood and beeswax, the walls lined with children's drawings, a few framed photos of Emily, her husband, and Sophie smiling in the sun. Linda swallowed hard at the sight of her absence in every frame. Emily took the cookie box, set it unopened on the shoe cabinet, and reached for a wooden box on the shelf. She lifted the lid and pulled out a cloudy white plastic bracelet, the faded letters spelling, "Emily Carter." A hospital band. Turning it between her fingers, Emily stared at her mother without blinking. "Do you remember this?" Linda felt her knees nearly give way. She nodded slowly, her lips trembling. "I wasn't there." Emily crossed her arms, her gaze as cold as a door shut tight. "Why are you here, Mom? To put on some late performance of regret? I'm used to it. You always chose the courtroom, the victories, the applause, while I sat in a hospital room with a cast on my arm." Her voice came out firm, but her chest rose and fell quickly. Linda lowered her eyes, her hands clasped tightly together. "I know. That night I should have been there. You watched the door and it never opened. I know it was me who kept it shut." Emily drew a sharp breath, her voice hardening. "It wasn't just that night. When Mark got his science award, you weren't there. On my 10th birthday, you mailed a package instead of showing up. And when friends talked about picnics with their parents, all I could do was fake a smile. You didn't fail once. You built an entire world where family was always last." Linda trembled, struggling to keep her voice steady. "I thought success would give you a secure childhood. But the truth is, I only left you with emptiness." Emily let out a brittle laugh, her eyes reddening. "You said it was for us but never asked what we needed. We needed you, not plaques on a wall or photos of ribbon cuttings." Linda stepped closer, her eyes blurred with tears. "I'm not asking you to forgive me right now. I'm just asking to be present, even if it's waiting on your porch or taking Sophie to school one day. I want you to know this time I won't walk away." Emily stayed silent, the hospital bracelet spinning like a scar that refused to heal. Finally, Linda reached into her bag and pulled out a yellowed envelope, the handwriting shaky but familiar. Emily. Her voice broke. Your father wrote this before he grew sicker. He asked me to give it to you. Emily froze, biting her lip as her fingers brushed over his handwriting. She opened the letter, each line echoing from the past. My daughter, I never hated your mother. I only regret that she missed our family. I hope you won't repeat that. Don't let anger steal your chance to love. While you still have one another, choose to stay together. A tear fell onto the page, smudging a word. Emily folded the letter, swallowing hard. You brought this to buy forgiveness, didn't you? Linda shook her head, her eyes wet. No. This isn't an excuse, it's the truth. Even your father didn't want you to lock your heart forever. Emily turned away, her voice breaking. You're good at making me waver, but I'm not ready. Not today. Linda exhaled, stepping back. I understand. I'll wait as long as it takes. The sound of small footsteps echoed from the stairs. Clutching a stuffed bear with eyes half closed with sleep, Sophie whispered, Mom, who's talking? Emily flinched, wiping her tears quickly, pulling her daughter close. It's nothing, go back to bed. But Sophie stopped when she saw Linda. Her wide eyes brimmed with curiosity as she clung to her mother's hand. That's Grandma. Why don't I see her like my friends see their grandmas? Emily froze, her chest tightening. She crouched down, meeting her daughter's eyes, searching for words. Because I wasn't ready for that yet. Sophie tilted her head, innocent and insistent. But I want to draw Grandma in our family picture. All my friends have their grandparents in theirs. Emily squeezed the hospital bracelet in her hand until it pressed red marks into her skin. She stood protectively in front of Sophie, but her daughter's pure gaze seemed to pierce through her defenses. Linda didn't move closer. She bent slightly, her voice trembling yet warm. I would be so happy to be in your picture. But only if your mom says yes. The air grew heavy with silence. Emily looked at her daughter, then at the letter in her hand, two layers of memory colliding. One child waiting for a door to open, and another waiting for her permission. Her shoulders sank. Her voice softened, fragile. All right, but only for tonight. And I can't promise anything about tomorrow. Linda broke down in tears, nodding over and over, as though she'd been handed the most precious gift. Sophie whispered with a bit of cheer. Then tonight I'll draw you too, Grandma. Emily didn't smile, but her eyes no longer held the same coldness. The late afternoon light slipped through the curtains, wrapping the three of them in a thin golden glow, fragile, but enough to signal that the door had finally begun to open. 1 year later, Christmas Eve returned, but Linda's kitchen was no longer the same. Gone were the silk tablecloths and perfectly aligned silver cutlery. A simple wooden table covered with a red and white checkered cloth stood in their place. Linda moved slowly but with deliberate care. She had cooked the entire meal herself. Stuffed turkey, mashed potatoes, roasted vegetables, dishes she had spent a year learning through scribbled recipes and many bitter failures. Flour still dusted the counter. A pan bore a scorch mark, but the aroma filled the small house with warmth. She set each plate in place and poured apple cider instead of expensive wine. The setting was modest, yet it carried a strange, tender glow. At the center of the table, she placed a photo of David, who was healthy and smiling, with his arm around the children. The frame was plain, wrapped only in a small garland of pine. Linda stood still for a moment, hands clasped, whispering like a promise, David, tonight I won't miss it. Her gaze swept across the room, where an empty chair no longer felt like a threat, but a space waiting for something new. The doorbell rang, and Linda quickly wiped her hands on her apron. At the door stood Emily with her husband and Sophie, and beside them was Mark, who was home from New York. No one spoke at first, the silence heavy with hesitation. Linda smiled, her voice trembling. Welcome home. Slowly, the four stepped inside and sat around the wooden table. The air felt thick, utensils clinking softly, yet no words came. Just as Linda opened her mouth, Sophie jumped up, handing her a folded card. On the paper was a large Christmas tree, and beneath it were 4 figures. Her mom, dad, Sophie, and Grandma standing together. I made this for you, Grandma. This year I want everyone there. Linda clutched the card, tears spilling down her cheeks. Mark gave a small, awkward smile, Emily lowered her gaze, and the fragile moment began to mend under a child's drawing. Linda looked at each face and whispered, "Thank you for sitting here with me tonight." In Sophie's bright eyes, in Emily's subtle nod, and in Mark's faint half-smile, Linda saw it clearly. This Christmas dinner, however awkward, was finally a family gathering. After a pause, Linda rose, her hands shaking yet steady, and began carving the turkey. The knife slid through the golden skin, releasing a sweet, savory aroma that filled the silence. "I never thought I could make this myself, but tonight, I wanted to serve you with my own hands." Mark lifted his glass of cider, raising a brow. "Not the fine red wine you used to prefer?" Linda chuckled softly, her tone warm. "Tonight, cider is enough." A ripple of laughter passed around the table, the first shared smile in years. Emily glanced at her mother, hesitation still in her eyes but softer now. Linda spooned mashed potatoes onto her daughter's plate. "I remember you hated onions, so I left them out." Emily looked up, caught off guard. "You remembered?" Linda nodded gently. "Some things may seem forgotten, but they never truly disappear." Sophie bit into a cookie, her face lighting up. "Better than the bakery." The table broke into laughter, the ice finally cracking. Mark then placed a small folder on the table. "I found this in an old box back in New York." He opened it. Inside was the unsent letter he'd written at 12, along with a few pages from a childhood journal. Emily glanced over, uneasy. Linda exhaled, fingers brushing the fragile paper. "Back then I missed it. But tonight I promise I'll read everything you want to share. No letter will ever sit unopened again." The air continued until Emily spoke softly. "I'm still angry. But I also see Sophie needs her grandmother. Maybe I need to learn how to open the door too, like Dad once wrote." Linda's voice quivered. "Just a crack is enough. I won't let it close again." Emily gave a slight nod. Not forgiveness yet, but a beginning. Outside, snow dusted the eaves, Christmas lights glowing through the window, bathing the modest table in color. No one spoke of what the future would bring, but the dinner was full of laughter, food, and warmth at that moment. Linda clutched Sophie's handmade card, knowing that redemption wasn't about erasing the past, but about building new moments, patiently, one by one. And this Christmas, she was no longer alone at the table. Linda's story is a journey of regret and redemption, and a mirror reflecting the choices many of us might fall into. She became a distant mother not because she didn't love her family, but because she carried a mistaken belief that career success and material achievements could replace love and presence in the ordinary moments of life. Social pressure, the urge to prove herself, and the fear of being underestimated drove her deeper into work, until one day she turned around and realized her family had already slipped too far out of reach. The lesson here is not to deny the value of a career, but to remind us, success in the outside world becomes hollow if it lacks the warmth of family beside it. A simple dinner together, a visit to the hospital, or just being present at the right time creates lasting memories for children and spouses. Linda paid a heavy price to learn this truth, but she also left us with a powerful message. Do not wait until it's too late to start showing up. What about you? How do you feel about this story? Have you ever witnessed or even experienced the trade-off between family and career? Please share your thoughts in the comments so we can discuss it together. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel for more moving stories like this.